The Palo Alto Network's firewall decryption configuration. Let's go ahead and take some stuff apart. It's like a bad set of Tinker Toys or something. I love it. Are we going to have to build it back together when we're done? Certificates, the fun things, that stuff that we're going to do to get started. Well, good news is it's all under the device menu. We got a lot of things under here. We got certificates, we got certificate profile, and we got OCSP responders. It's kind of hard to get that mixed up. Anyway, so OCSP, by the way, is Online Certificate Status Protocol. This is something Microsoft has one, for example. It automates the requests for SSL certs. So it can make things really simple on there. I'm not going to use that. I'm not going to really get into that, but just know that it exists, that we can interface with that, particularly for client verification and CRLs, kind of the important thing, the certificate revocation list, just seeing exactly what goes on for stuff. But really what I want to kind of concentrate on is just the plain Jane, but the plain old certificates on here. And really the key thing for where to get started is going to be under generate. Well, I guess unless you've already got one offline, you can just go straight to import. But in generate, we can do things on here, whether we're doing it for ourselves or more importantly through a SSL certificate vendor. And just give it a name, whatever you feel like name it. Lab VM, can't type today, okay, and so common name on here would be either an IP address or the FQDN. So if we're going to be working on something that's going to be both inside and outside addresses, because I always kind of go back and forth about this, but essentially, normally I've got like private addresses configured, but I also have a public side to my firewall. So which direction am I concerned about how things are going to be presented? If I do it by IP address, may work great for inside my organization, perfectly cool, but whenever somebody comes in from outside, if the certificate has to be presented, like if I'm doing web administration or something like that, it will show the wrong IP address or the wrong host name, quote unquote. So when we're starting to look at that, that'll be something to kind of think about, if you will. We'll just call this pan FW lab and give it a domain name and click on who it's going to be signed by. In this case, we're going to do an external authority on that, so really standard stuff. Cryptographic settings. Honestly, you can change things on here. We can go up to 3072 bits if you want to. 2048 is pretty much the standard these days, as is SHA-256. Go by what your vendor happens to require. So it's not like one thing is necessarily better than the other, especially if it's not going to be supported for things. Expiration typically is a year, but again, you can kind of play with that as you go. Down under the attributes, and you're going to have to add these. You need to know what to add based on what the vendor that you're using happens to require. So at a minimum, they're going to have state and country. Many of them will also require locality, so like a city name or something along those lines to go with it as well. What things are on here is, I guess, completely up to you for what we're going to have. Let's see. Oh, it didn't type that. That's always nice. You. Fine, be that way. I'll scroll down and pick it. But anyway, there we go. US, right in the middle by Estonia. That's where I would look for that. So anyway, but add the things on here based on what the requirements are going to be. Now, you can add more than one on here as well from like an IP address standpoint. So this may help you out with having multiple IPs. We do this a lot of times with names as well. There's something called a SAN, or a subject alternative name, or a subject alternate name. May be an idea to have in there. Okay, we might need email. Go ahead and put that in. This one, I guess. Delete. Okay, email. Let's put my email address on here. When you're done with this, just generate the information. I'll kind of kick everything out to you. Successfully generate certificate and key pair. Okay, that's perfectly cool. And we can go in and take a look at the information for it. So I'll seize everything that we have. Next thing you're going to want to do once we have that, check that box and go to click on export right here. All right, so export, and that'll go ahead and download to whatever machine that you're on. It'll be called cert underscore and the name of it that you called it, so lab VM. So it has that information there. So that is the text file now that we can go to whatever our provider is and upload the information. So I'll go ahead and pause it here while I go do that. Okay, so once we're back in here, go ahead and we'll click on this and say import. And my certificate name is going to be the same thing at that point. PanFW, and my certificate file. I can browse for that. And there's my desktop here. Okay, and everything else, we didn't put a private key on there or anything, so we are good to go for that. If we did, we'd have to put the password onto it. And now we have the information there. So we've gone ahead and got a valid certificate for everything that we have here for our own server. Now we can do the same thing, by the way, as far as importing other certificates. So if I'm going to go through and handle these certificates when we set up a decryption policy, I'll want to import my own server-side certificates. I'll just say mail1. But anyway, my own server-side certificates on there. So desktop here, where we're at. And same type of thing. Okay, so we got the information. Whoops, all right, fine. Server 1. And we can import each of those, so it will be able to use them as it sees, as we have decryption first of all, but also as it sees traffic destined for whatever domain information, whatever URL is contained in that. I can go ahead and import another one here to say mail server 2. And whatever certificates that you've got for internal stuff, I just go ahead and import them. And if you've got the passkeys on it, that's all good to go. So that's kind of the simple thing as far as maintaining all of our information here. Know, by the way, that's KNOW, what your SSL provider is going to require in terms of the information on there. Otherwise, you may have to come back and regenerate your CSR, your certificate request, before going ahead and putting that out there. So that's the simplicity as far as my keys itself. Now, SSL decryption policies, on the other hand, are going to be a little bit different in terms of where I'm at. Okay? Now, that's going to be all under policies, and I have a separate setup for decryption right here. Okay? So nothing that I have going on quite at the moment, nothing that I have listed for it or telling you what to do. But I can go ahead and add the information in there. Most of the policy is going to be going down the list of the way that we do regular security policies. Okay, so one of the things that I want to do on here, as we go through kind of see what it is we have. I suppose first I want to jump into options and look at what it is that I have. I can do the SSL forward proxy, I can do an SSH proxy, or I can do the SSL inbound exception, but more importantly, I can click an action of decrypt or no decrypt. Okay, and this is going to be kind of important, my point of view, as we want to go through here, because like a task that I want to do to begin with is, we'll say, stuff to avoid. And you may have rules or laws that say what you can't actually do on here. Okay? And source, I guess we'll go from my internal stuff. So add things on here. We'll say clients. Nothing, we're not going to worry about users or anything else like that on there. Destination can be any, that's perfectly fine. But I want to get into URL category. And in here, there's, again, lots of things that I want to add, but let's say that we want to do financial services, and I would add healthcare as well, health and medicine right here, as really two things that I want to avoid. And go to options right here and make sure to say no decrypt. So there really isn't any profiles going to be associated with it right now because we're actually not doing any decryption. So once we're done with that, just go ahead and click on OK. That'll tell me exactly what I'm having, and we'll see the summary right here of exactly what's going to be going on. So that's kind of the idea for it, and we can go in and put the things that we do want to do or don't want to do, anything along those lines for what requirements that we have. But it's all about setting up that profile or the policy for how I want to do things. So we'll go ahead and set up a couple others for my inbound inspection, things like that on there. So we'll say mail 1, source to be internet at this point. So we're going to have things coming in. So anything, any person, any stuff like that. Destination will be on servers. We'll assume that that's where it's going to go. And my address. I want to find, there we go, mail server 1. Okay. URL category, really not going to be important for this. Now options on here, I do want to decrypt it. So we'll pick on that right here. It is going to be an inbound inspection. Now when we do this, notice the certificate field pops up. So I can tell it which certificate that I'm actually going to use on here to get those. Oop, we got to go put a check mark by the certificates. So we'll just put this for PANFW right now and then go back and edit it. Okay. Decryption profile, if we wanted to create one, go ahead and create one here. Okay, test profile. Apparently can't spell. Okay. But this gives me ideas as far as what we can do, what things that I want to either block on or additional restrictions, things where there's not going to be any options for it, but I want to set this as a policy. So certificate checks, unsupported mode checks, failure checks on here, my inbound inspection, which would really be more appropriate to this part. I guess we'll call this test inbound profile. And I look at things and might want to block the unsupported checks on here. Same thing, failure checks, if not available, I'll probably just go ahead and pass it through, let that go. You think about what your mode of operation is going to be. In SSH, we could have things like that too. It will kind of keep things simple on here. So I just want to create a simple inbound profile and apply it to that, and we are good to go on there. Went ahead and added a third policy in there to actually decrypt the user traffic. Same type of thing. Whenever we're creating these policies, by the way, the same logic applies that we do with our security policies, in that when I find my first match, I'm done. So the order on here is going to be important, like my stuff to avoid being up at the top. Right? Beyond that, it works like any other policy does. So those are kind of the simple things as far as what we have, or really what we have going on for enabling and doing the decryption. So we've gone over a few things on here, specifically revolving around our wonderful world of decryption. So we want to decrypt my SSL, SSH, although we only set this up for SSL, but same idea on here. So best thing we went into was my certificates as far as generating the CSR and then going ahead and importing the various CRTs. So different files that we had. We just did straightforward ones, nothing too incredibly fancy on it, but know what we had along there. We didn't go into it, but we could have seen off the same tab the trusted CAs. There's a whole huge list that Palo Alto actually gets into. So chances are whoever getting your SSL certificate from is already on there, but just in case if it wasn't, then we would have to import and trust the root CAs. And most places, when you get an SSL cert, will also include the root certificates or the intermediate certificates along with it, so that you can put those in if you have to do something along those lines. Okay, so I mean, certain ones, if you go with VeriSign or Thought or a couple of the other major ones on there, pretty much everybody's going to have those these days. But if you're picking some of the one-off or smaller vendor stuff, or if you're setting up your own, like if you're working for a government organization or something like that, then you may need to worry about importing those root CAs into your firewalls and different devices. Same type of thing if we're getting down into setting up my policy later on. One of the things that we talked about was making sure that your users trust the firewall certificate, so that you don't get a bunch of errors and things like that. You can do trust to user via GPO. At least if you're in a Microsoft domain, which probably is the most common thing anyway. Otherwise, I guess you'd have to depend on what specific information you were going on. You may need to go from machine to machine otherwise. So GPO probably the easiest way to do it. But anyway, that's the idea for where we're going to do things. And we set up our decrypt policies, like we said, the same way we do a security policy, in order, determining what things we do want to do, what things we don't want to do, and just setting it up for what our policy happens to be. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.